It's great to be here today with all of you. I don't know about you guys, but I could use a little bit of a distraction. So I hope this is that for you. A little bit of time to just relax, think about some delicious and delightful things. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about pumpkin spice and what fall means to us and to our brains. So, question for you, not to get too political or anything, but is to take the poll, have you vote for your favorite season. You are welcome to join Jim in the chat and me also and talk a little bit about this. But is fall your favorite season? So, can you guys just a second to see if anyone wants to contribute and join in that. Jim, are we getting any responses on that? I'm not seeing the chat room. Oh, there it is. There it is. There's the chat room. Fall is the best. Okay, that's what I've got. So polls and surveys typically report that somewhere between a quarter to 40% of Americans prefer fall. So that they say that the fall is their favorite season. Fall usually wins the popularity vote, although it's sometimes beaten by spring. But those two are typically the ones that are on the highest voted for season. So lots of people love fall. And whether or not that's your favorite season throughout the whole year, or it feels like your favorite for a few weeks, right now while things are perfect, then we love fall. So I thought today we would talk about 5 different reasons that we love fall, and that will take us into an exploration of pumpkin spice and lots of other delightful things. So one of the things that we love about fall is the physical comfort of this season. We actually love these cooler temperatures. Surveys indicate that Americans find the ideal temperature to be 72 degrees, the ideal outdoor temperature. And there's a range, of course, and people tend to prefer temperatures between 60 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit as their favorite temperatures. Well, that's not just what we think that we like. It's actually where our body functions the best. So our bodies, the human body, our normal temperature is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius. That varies a little bit for most of us. Lots of you have a pretty good idea of what your normal temperature is. If you're like me, I get your temperature taken everywhere you go these days. So we might know that we typically run just a tad lower than that. Most of us actually do. But what happens, so you would think, okay, well, if the human body temperature is 98.6, why aren't I more comfortable when it's like 98 degrees outside? Wouldn't that make sense? Wouldn't it make sense if I preferred it, like, not to have to do any work to warm up my body? Well, what actually happens is that all of the energy that we expend to keep our internal organs going, the metabolic activity that you constantly have running, and all of the functioning of your internal organs produces heat. So it's a little bit like when you have your computer running, it can overheat, especially if you have it set up in a certain place or in a hot room, then your computer would overheat, right? Same thing's happening with your body. Your body will overheat. So you need to have some fans, keep the exterior a little bit cooler. We actually function best when the outside temperature is in the 70s. So somewhere between 22 and 26 degrees Celsius. And what that means is that, kind of like our little thermograph up here in the corner of our two humans, when it's cold outside, your body is still generating all that heat in the core areas, keeping those internal organs functioning, and your extremities get a little bit cooler. Come back to that in just a minute. When it's warm outside, then more of your body is maintaining that 98.6, but it's going to be a little bit harder to cool down. It's not just the heat, it's the humidity. I don't know about you, but that's one of the things that I'm excited about this week. With the temperatures are down, but also it seems like the humidity is down. Now, I haven't actually checked, but I think that it actually is. What happens with humidity, and the reason that humidity is kind of a problem, is that we cool off by sweating when we get a little bit overheated. Sweat covers your body with a little bit of moisture that evaporates, removes body heat. And then when the outside air has humidity, has water in it, it slows down the ability of that moisture on your skin to be able to evaporate. So your sweating is less effective. You're not able to cool your body as easily. So at higher temperatures, we do tend to sweat more, but it's less effective and we overheat faster. This graph looks at air temperatures across the top and relative humidities down the side. When the air temperature is around 70, as in that first column there, when the relative humidity fluctuates anywhere from 10%, which is very dry to us, to 100% humidity, which is what a typical August day for us here in Richmond is. So how does 70 degrees feel? Well, it feels pretty much the same, somewhere between 65 and 72. When the air temperature gets a little bit higher, for example, 90 degrees or 95 degrees, then all of a sudden, as the humidity increases, the apparent temperature to our body goes way, way up. It skews incredibly high. Every little bit of humidity really exaggerates how that temperature feels to us. So that has a lot to do with why our body functions best at that 70 to 75 degrees temperature. And also that is a temperature that we're going to prefer. So, like I mentioned before, when it is a little cooler outside, yes, we're functioning better, we're a little bit more comfortable, and our body is doing, producing sweat, like we talked about. It's doing vascular dilation, and or constriction, doing lots of things to change our blood vessels and allow us to cool off or warm up as we're depending on the exterior temperature. So when we're a little bit chilly, then our extremities get cold faster. So this is one of the reasons we want to wrap our hands around a warm mug of tea or a pumpkin spice latte to keep those extremities warm and give your hypothalamus a break. Hypothalamus is a region in the brain that's in charge of turning that temperature up and down. And it regulates all of those different body functions to warm you up or cool you down. All right, I'm going to pause really quick. So that was our first reason why we love fall. And then we're going to pause for any quick questions that people might have.
So I just did have a quick question just for myself. And I've noticed this. I'm a runner. And when I was living in California, I noticed that it could be 95 degrees out in Northern California with like 30% humidity. And it was much easier to run there with the low humidity than it is here. With like 75 degrees and much higher humidity.
Yeah.
So how does it change perceived effort when the humidity is that
high? It's a great observation, and that's it's the same thing that people always say who live out in the Southwest always say, like, oh, well, but it's a dry heat. You're like, but it's 120 degrees. How can a dry heat help? It really does change so much about our perception of the effort. How much energy that your body needs to expend in order to cool your body and maintain homeostasis. So homeostasis is the biological function of keeping all your systems within a normal range. So when you're running, your your core temperature is going up because you've got to pump blood to all your muscles. You've got to pump blood to your lungs and help them to function and so forth. So all of that's happening at this high rate, and your body has to, in particular your brain, that part of the brain I mentioned, the hypothalamus, has to like kind of tune everything and keep it in balance. The hotter it is, the more the more humid, the more effortful that is. So if your sweating isn't as effective because of the humidity, it's going to feel like a huge effort to cool down your body. So good question. So next we're going to talk about we're going to talk about predictable novelty. So novelty meaning something that's new, but predictable meaning we can tell what's coming. So this is a little bit of a confusing juxtaposition of terms, but I really think that this is a part of why we love fall. When we look across the seasons, sometimes it's easy to forget while we're in one season how much things have changed since another season. And so, but when we look outside, if I look out my window right here, it's a very different scene than it was just a few months ago. And so there's a large amount of change that has happened. And yet that is a change that we can predict, we can rely on. We have a pretty good idea of what changes are going to happen. Fall grabs our attention. There's a lot going on. There are colors that are changing, and they're not just any color, they're bright colors that capture our attention and focus where we're looking. There's this constant movement, this raining of leaves outside of our windows. There's a lot going on, new smells, this changing temperatures, things that are a little bit different. So I wanted to draw your attention to the attention pathways in the brain. Some of the regions that we're looking at here are the thalamus. That's this larger structure in this very center of the brain. The thalamus we think of as kind of Grand Central Station, or the Atlanta airport. It's the place where our sensory information comes in, and then we change directions, reroute, and make our connections to the cortex, or these exterior regions of the brain. The central amygdala, the amygdala is important for fear or threat assessment, as is the PVN, of the paraventricular nucleus. And so those regions are sort of, hey, what is that? And is that important? Right? So these regions function together. They're all connected together, and they serve as an innate warning system for change. And that keeps us alive. It's really important for us to be able to, like, oh, something's different. Is that a threat or not a threat? Right? So it's built into our brain. Like I was mentioning, there's a lot of changes going on in the season. And what that adds up to is just the right amount of stress. What do I mean by that? A lot of people are thinking, oh, I'm so stressed out. Everything's horrible. I don't like to be stressed. But I argue that you do like to be stressed. But what you like is just a little bit of safe stress. This is where we're thinking about riding a roller coaster, or do some other fun challenge. Anything from maybe being tickled by a friend, or loved one. So that the essence of whether or not tickling feels weird or scary, or whether it's funny and makes you laugh, has to do with who's tickling you. What's the context of it, right? Is it safe? And same thing with a roller coaster. Maybe you've been to a carnival that you sort of questioned whether or not you should get on that ride or not, and it was a little less fun. But when you're pretty confident in how secure you are, that can be just the right amount of stress, and it gives you a thrill. It's actually a combination of the stress hormones with the judgment of your brain that, yes, this is scary, but safe at the same time, that makes things feel good. So in combination with this fall season grabbing our attention, focusing us, switching us out of that complacency of the end of summer doldrums, and then also switching on just the right amount of stress to make it rewarding and interesting. Fall is filled with those predictable novelties. That was a pretty quick one. We're going to move on to associations unless we have any questions at this moment.
Do animals also like fall?
Oh, that's a good question. Depends a lot on the animal. It's hard it's hard to know. A lot of animals are going into hibernation mode, so they're eating a lot, and kind of like we are maybe. And so, but they're eating a lot. And different animals have different mating seasons. Some animals mate in the fall so that the females can gestate through the winter, like just like polar bears and lots of animals will do this, and then they give birth in the spring, right? And so there's a lot going on for animals during this season. So it's hard to know like why they might prefer one season or another, and it really depends on the specific animal. Interesting question. Thanks.
Can you elaborate a little more on which areas of the thalamus are involved in that predictable novelty feeling?
Ooh, that's a good question. So the thalamus is a structure that is broken down into lots of different nuclei, and I will have to think about that for a second. Let me see. Let me get my memory pathways triggered and see if I can come back to that one. So remind me of it later if I don't come back to it. So I don't know exactly which nuclei those are. Yeah. Why do we love fall? One of the reasons that we love fall is the associations that we make with it, right? So we were just talking about a lot of these different changes and things that are going on during the fall. They're changing colors, smells, there's interesting foods, plants that are blooming or that we harvest during the season. And a lot of the things that we have during the fall are cues to memories. So we might have different memories for example, at least in a normal fall is a season when kids go back to school. So you might have a lot of, and as someone who has essentially been in school since I was 5, because I was, between my Ph.D. and then teaching college, I've been in school for most of my life. And so the rhythm of the life cycle of that and the career cycle can be really thrilling. You have lots of nostalgic, back to school shopping, and that's really fun. Halloween, Thanksgiving, lots of different memories that exist in that fall period of time. So nostalgia is a specific kind of memory. So here in this brain, what's highlighted in orange in the center of this brain is the hippocampus. Hippocampus is a region of the brain that we know to be important for encoding memories. So as we take in information, that region is really important to encode memories and to consolidate memories. So taking all the experiences that we're having, fitting them together and sort of shuttling them out to different regions of the brain for storage. And then this is also a region where we can access those memories. Well, the hippocampus alone is not essential for nostalgia. What's cool about nostalgia, it's a special kind of memory that also involves some of the emotional pathways, the limbic system. We're going to see some pictures of the limbic system in a few slides. And I'll talk about it a little bit more. But essentially the limbic system it includes the hippocampus, and then it sort of wraps around the hippocampus. So some of these structures that are sort of in shadow in this particular imagery are involved and connected here. So when we have specific memories that draw on our emotions, we're going to be able to connect to nostalgia. I'll be coming back to this concept in just a little bit as we're talking about some specific kinds of things like holidays and foods that are connections to nostalgia. So I wanted to mention it here with these associations. While we are having all these associations with different memories that we have, our neurons, the cells that make up our brain, are secreting neurotransmitters. So the way that neurons work is that they are electrical, and they generate electrical impulses. But then what they transmit from one neuron to the next is chemical. And so the way that they are communicating is a chemical transmission. So that's what I have blown up here in this little diagram. And this other diagram, we're looking at more of an anatomical sketch of the synapse, where a presynaptic cell, one neuron, this blue neuron, is talking to a postsynaptic cell, this sort of peach-colored one. And it's secreting neurochemicals or neurotransmitters out into the space between one neuron and the other. They sit really, really close together, and they send signals to each other. And then there are receptors, you can just the ears, the listeners of this cell, and those receptors are listening for specific messages. And those messages are what's being sent by other neurons in the form of chemicals. So you've probably heard of neurotransmitters before, and especially some of the ones that I'm going to bring up right now. So dopamine, for example, is involved in pleasure. It's important for lots of different things like addiction. It's a neurotransmitter that's involved in some diseases like Parkinson's. It does lots of different things. In this context, we're thinking about what dopamine does in the reward pathway, and that is that it helps to regulate our concept of pleasure, what's exciting, what's fun, what feels good. Speaking of feeling good, endorphins are actually a neurotransmitter. So lots of you may have, Jim was mentioning that he likes to go running. When we exercise, when we do things that give us a rush that feels really good, we have this burst of endorphins. You've heard of that. Endorphin is a term, and it actually means endogenous morphine. So endogenous is something that we create inside of our body, and morphine is the opioid, the opioid drug. So morphine was discovered first back in the 1800s. And so scientists already knew about morphine, but they didn't know why it worked. Well, they discovered it worked. We have receptors for opioids. And that is because we make our own opioids, and those are endorphins. So what that does is it blocks pain reception temporarily inside of our body. So when we have endorphin release, we're actually squirting out a little bit of sort of like morphine into our brain, and that's kind of cool. So that gives us a lack of pain. Another neurotransmitter involved in pleasurable activities like nostalgia is oxytocin. A lot of people refer to oxytocin as the love hormone. It's involved in social connections. This is it's a neuron. A neurotransmitter also functions as a hormone, and it's involved in mother-infant bonding as well as couples bonding, and it's important for those kinds of social connections. Side note, it has been shown that if you hug or kiss someone for longer than 6 seconds, that you can instigate your brain to start secreting that oxytocin. So there's times when my husband will count to 6 before, while he's, giving me a hug or a kiss. And, okay, there you go. There's your oxytocin rush. Go have a good day. So that's a little bit of nerd, love tips, I guess, that I have for you. Norepinephrine is involved with alertness. So your coffee and other stimulants that we might use work to enhance the functions of norepinephrine. as well as doing some other things in our brain, but we secrete this already. And serotonin, you might have heard of. It seems to be involved in mood functioning. A lot of people take Prozac or other SSRIs to modulate depression or anxiety. And so serotonin does seem to be involved with sort of that feeling of contentment. It's not so much happiness, but it's sort of the lack of sadness. That seems to be involved. So these neurotransmitters are involved in all of the good feelings and the connections that we make during fall. So we've reached another pause point. So pause real quick. This next one's a short one too.
We did have one viewer say that their dog seems to love fall, which I guess kind of makes sense.
It definitely makes sense. I've been going on some walks on a nearby hiking trail with a friend of mine, and she brings her dog, and the dog loves fall. It's because it's cooler, and she can run more, play more without getting overheated, chasing the leaves falling and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, certainly we can see that animals seem to like it, but in terms of studies, I'm not sure.
So we do have a question here. Does the effectiveness of your neurotransmitters change as you age?
I don't know of any of studies about whether the neurotransmitters effectiveness changes as you age. Now, neurotransmitters effectiveness does change because of experiences that we have. So, for example, this is one of our theories of addiction and how it works is that like when you take a drug over and over that feels good, and we can use sugar as an example, right? Like, so if you eat a piece of candy, it's amazing and you feel like, yeah, that was awesome, I'm going to eat more. And the second one is good, but it's not quite as good. And then the third piece of candy is, and then when you go back later that day, you're like, well, I better grab 5 pieces of candy because I want to feel as good as I did earlier. So what happens is that the receptors are less, it's like they're turned down. It's as if the receptors are if it was a hearing device, that you'd be turning down the volume a little bit because it's like, oh, somebody shouted at me, the candy caused a dopamine release, and that shouted at me, well, I'm going to turn down the volume and not receive the next signal quite as much, right? So then you got to eat more or take more drugs or do more things or whatever in order to have the same response. So all of our different pathways work the same way, and that's why different drugs that you might be taking that affect the brain over a period of time, they lose their effectiveness, or certain drugs work in certain people because their receptors are laid out in a different pattern, or they're tuned to a different frequency, or they're at a different volume setting. And so it takes weeks sometimes for the drugs that affect neurotransmitters to adjust. So I don't know about like age, but I do know that experience will change it. And with age, we get experience. So probably there are some changes. I just don't know of any literature on that. So great question. Really interesting. Well, I'm going to move on to anticipation. This is one of the things that we love most about fall is that it's the season of anticipation. We are looking forward to the next season change and all that it brings. So when the weather starts cooling off, we're enjoying that moment. But a lot of what we do is that we're thinking ahead about what's next, because your brain is always trying to predict things. That's what we do. We want to know what's coming next. We want to constantly be making assessments of what's going to happen so that we can be prepared for it. And we know, well, right around December 21st, when that next season changes, there's a whole bunch of fun parties, there's gifts, there's lights and decorations and food and events and things to do. So it's something to look forward to. So what we're doing is we're getting excited about the next thing. As the season changes, we get excited about Halloween, and then we get excited about Thanksgiving, and then we start getting excited about winter holidays like Christmas and Hanukkah and those kinds of seasonal the winter season things. And what's happening here in the brain is that the dopamine system, I was just talking with you guys about dopamine, and this area in the middle of the brain where this white dot is the ventral tegmental area, or VTA. The VTA is a region where most of the dopamine in the whole brain is produced. So a lot of it's made there in the VTA, and then it sort of spreads out from there and talks to other regions of the brain. Well, some of the regions, the pathways that it's working with is the amygdala, which I think I've mentioned before today, and that's sort of the fear and threat assessment kind of area that we're thinking about. The nucleus accumbens here, that is really involved in the pleasure pathway. So if amygdala is thinking about fear or threat, nucleus accumbens is thinking about, yay, exciting, fun stuff is getting ready to happen. And then our prefrontal cortex, the part of the cortex that's right behind our forehead, that's a region that's involved in our thinking, our processing, our understanding how things go together. And so when we're putting together, hey, here's something that just happened. Hey, Halloween just happened and the leaves are coming down and it's chilly outside. Thanksgiving's coming up. I'm so excited. I can't wait. I love to, have that big event, right? And so your prefrontal cortex is combining what did happen, and then your hippocampus is involved in that memory part of the brain, and it's saying, okay, I remember last year, and then I'm able to do what's called prospective memory, which is memory that is in the future. I'm remembering what did happen, and I'm predicting what's getting ready to happen. So all these regions of the brain work together for us to build what we know as anticipation and excitement. And it turns out that anticipation is better than receiving the rewards itself. I think I might have had one more picture that was supposed to show up here, but that's okay. So when we are, for example, playing the slots, we're looking forward to maybe getting a reward. And it's the same thing if somebody hands you a gift. Think of the children in your life that are sitting there on Christmas morning with this pile of presents next to them or something like that. That moment right before that you receive is actually even more rewarding to the brain. There's tons of dopamine squirting out through this whole pathway that is encoding those memories and instilling a ton of emotional context into those memories so that we are building anticipation. And what your brain's doing is it's also saying, okay, when those lights go up, when that tree goes up, when, and even before that, I can predict once there is Thanksgiving, then we're leading up into this Christmas season. And maybe I'm going to have some parties with some friends and that's going to be fun. All that stuff is building anticipation. And it's super fun. It's really exciting. There's a reason why this pathway of anticipation and dopamine is very vulnerable to addiction, whether it's gambling addiction, shopping addiction, food addiction, illicit drugs addiction. All of those things are all working on that same pathway. So maybe we're a little bit addicted to fall or the holidays. I don't know, but mostly it's there to help us find the joy and remember the joy. So let's talk about food. Hopefully you guys have your lunch snacks with you because I'm going to show you a bunch of pictures of food. Get your tummies rumbling. in the fall, lots of foods are harvested, and it's their season, right? So, what's fun is that these are different foods than we have been enjoying in the spring and summer. And so we have certain recipes, certain things that we really enjoy, and things that we strongly associate with the fall. And in addition to that, we have these big feasts and meals that we have with traditional foods that we tend to repeat every year. So that's then going to tie into the nostalgia that we talked about before, the associations, and so forth. The sort of the predictable novelty. Is it going to be exactly the same this year, or are there a couple of new changes on the table? Right. So lots of the things that we love about fall come into play here as we're thinking about a feast meal that we will have. So how does taste work? Well, let's talk a little bit about taste buds. You've probably heard of them, and maybe you studied them in school, maybe not. There are these bumps on your tongue when you look at them. You have lots of little bumps, and then there are some larger bumps. You can actually look at those yourself in a magnifying mirror and be able to see those. Those are the ones that are toward the tip of your tongue, the fungiform papillae. Papillae is the term for your taste bud, and so they're sort of big flat bumps next to all the little bumps. On the sides of your tongue, toward the back, are some folds in the tissue, and inside of those are these foliate taste buds or papillae. So those exist there, sort of deep into the folds, and then you have these circumvallate taste buds way in the back. You've probably noticed that when you're chewing food, when you're tasting it, you don't just taste on the tip of your tongue. There's certain things that you taste there, but as you chew something and roll it around in your mouth, different flavors are evoked, and you're able to more fully experience food as you bring it into your mouth and you're chewing it. So the taste buds in different regions are serving different functions, and allowing the chemicals that you're taking in to communicate with the brain. What happens in each of these little blue dots is that it's a taste pore. It's a bundle of cells. The chemicals that you're taking in sort of drop down in here, and they make contact with what are called gustatory hairs. There's little hairs at the inside this taste pore, this little hole, and those cause these cells to fire, to change their electrical properties because of the connections on the receptors here. And that then sends a signal down this sort of yellow line that's indicating our nerves, and that's going to send a signal into the brain to tell us what it is that you've tasted. Now, there are 5 basic taste sensations. When I was in school, it was only 4, and that's probably true for a lot of you guys. But then when I was in graduate school, we learned about this 5th basic taste sensation. So you probably know about bitter, salty, sweet, and sour. Those are tasted on all regions of the tongue. It used to be thought that you could taste certain, like some of them better on the sides or the front of your tongue. And it turned out with more testing that wasn't actually true. So that's a myth busted for today. We actually taste those pretty evenly across the tongue. And then that 5th one is called umami. It's from a group of Japanese researchers that discovered that it was in fact a different set of cells. So we have sweet tastes, that detect sugar, saccharin, alcohol, and some amino acids. Sour is going to detect hydrogen ions, like those that we will taste in lemon or bitter medicine, or something like that. Or not bitter medicine, that's hydrogen ions. Anyway, Salt is going to detect metal ions. So typically that's going to be the sodium chloride salt that we taste, but you'll also taste saltiness with some other contact with metal ions. And then bitter is alkaloids, quinine, nicotine, coffee. Bitter gourds will also evoke those bitter sensations, things like that. And then umami is it will detect glutamate and aspartate. Those are specific amino acids that we eat all the time. They're part of what we eat. But they it's sort of a meaty, brothy taste. You'll taste it in sort of a meat broth. It's not the salty, it's not anything else, it's its own unique taste. So 5 basic tastes that we have. But taste is not just those taste receptors on your on your tongue. In fact, taste is mostly other things other than those taste buds. It's 80% smell, which those of you who maybe are wine tasters or gourmets will know. You eat with your nose a lot. So much of what we detect in flavor is actually through our nose. We also rely a lot on thermoreceptors, so the temperature of a food, mechanoreceptors, the touch or feel of the food, nociceptors, which is like the pain of the food, for example, hot sauce or the coolness of menthol or mint, different, or even the bubbliness of carbonated beverage or something like that. All of those influence taste. The temperature and texture then can either enhance or detract from the taste. So, for example, if you have, I don't know, a Dorito, delightful, right? But if it goes stale and it's soft and sort of wet, it has the same taste, but the texture is changed so much that we will often find that just awful. It's gross to us. Temperature and texture, as well as the mouthfeel, can really influence which foods that we want to eat at what time. So I've got this hand sort of trying to choose whether it wants this donut or some raw veggies. Right? And so most of the time, our human brain wants the donut because it wants that mouthfeel. Our brain is designed to be rewarded by higher fats, high caloric density foods, because throughout most of human history, we were struggling to get enough food. So your brain just wants that stuff. It tastes good and it feels good in your mouth. There's something like 27 different metrics of mouthfeel that gourmets use to determine how a food feels in your mouth. So it's not just crunchy or soft. There's also like how it breaks in your mouth, how gummy it is, how much does it stick to your teeth or not? How much does it feel more liquid versus more solid? Like there's all these different like professional ways of tasting food that has to do with all those things. So there's a lot. I want to zero in on smell just a little bit more while we're talking about how we detect flavor, and think about how smells make us feel. Smells are an incredibly important part of our memory. I mentioned the limbic system to you before, and we've talked about the hippocampus. We've talked about the amygdala, which is tightly linked to the hippocampus. Amygdala is in charge of our fear or emotional centers. That's tightly linked to our memory centers. We've talked about the thalamus, which is this grand central station in the brain. We've talked about the hypothalamus under here, which is involved in things like temperature regulation. The prefrontal cortex, which is thinking about things. And then here now we're going to add this olfactory bulb. The olfactory bulb is a part of the brain that sits almost underneath your brain at the top of your nose. As you inhale and smell things, those scents, those olfactory pieces go straight to that olfactory bulb and right into your limbic system. Smell is the only sense that does that. Every other sense goes through the thalamus first and then gets processed. Smell goes straight to the limbic system, and the emotional value of it is added before it goes any further. So smell memories, when you walk in and you get a sense of something, it can really evoke a more powerful memory than a lot of other senses. When we think about certain kinds of food, like baked goods that we might eat in a seasonal setting, then we're going to be layering onto that some specific smells and flavors that we're then going to associate with the season. Right? We talked about associations before, memories. So that leads us to pumpkin spice here at the towards the end here. So what is pumpkin spice? It's a combination of spices. Typically, pumpkin spice does not include pumpkin at all. It has a combination of different spices. These are the main spices that are included in a pumpkin spice blend. And we'll look at those in just a little bit. We'll zero in on them a little bit more here. These spices are some of the most ancient spices that we have as humans. Like these have been around as long as we've had spices. Ginger was cultivated over 5,000 years ago in Southeast Asia, and rapidly, as humans expanded, they took ginger with them. That was one of the first plants to be translocated around the globe. Cinnamon was recorded in Indian spice trading back in 2000 BCE. And so we know that was in common use at that time. Cloves are mentioned in Mesopotamian texts in 1700 BCE, and in Rome in 1 CE. So we know that that's been around and moved around in spice trading very early on. Nutmeg, we know that it has been around for a long time, but it was introduced to Europe around 550 BCE. So it's been around for a very long time and spreading around the globe and a part of the diet. Mace, which is not always included in this blend, but sometimes it is. It's a spice that's derived from the coating of nutmeg pods. So if you pull nutmeg apart, then you can grind up part of it for what we traditionally think of as nutmeg, and part of it then can become mace. It's used throughout many countries for centuries. It was popularized in Europe in the 12th century. And was a huge motivator for some of the major spice trading wars and challenges in the 16th century. Allspice is a plant that's unique to Jamaica, and so they were using that. It's a valuable spice in Jamaican jerk seasoning and traditional foods there, and then it was discovered by Europeans in the 1600s and prized for being a blend of cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves. A lot of times when you buy allspice, if it has a space between it, allspice, then it may be just a blend of those other three that is being marketed as allspice. If there's not the space, if it's allspice is all one word, it comes from the allspice berry, and that is its own unique individual thing. So it's actually like kind of different. So that's kind of neat. These spices have been around for such a long time. They've been a part of the recipes that we have passed down for generations upon generations. It is very likely that when we say that we are what we eat, it's very true. And whether or not these spices are necessarily encoded in our DNA, I don't know, but certainly in epigenetics, which is a whole other field we won't get into today, but the kinds of tags, the way that we respond to things begins to change. And so when we know spices, when we know foods, common foods become things that we're used to and that we respond to in different ways. So it's entirely likely that not only are these foods, these spice blends, things that we have that we're familiar with from our own learned experience, but these are traditions that have been passed down for such a long time in human history that they're valuable and important. The recipes vary, but not by much in terms of what pumpkin spice is. So it might include a few other things. So we don't have to fight about that too much. But I wanted to end there. We should still have maybe a couple minutes if there's some last questions about foods or anything else I've talked about today. I'm happy to do that.
We had the question, what does it mean when someone thinks salt tastes bitter or sweet? So can you kind of address maybe what's happening in the brain when someone is experiencing something like that with their taste?
Yes, it's just usually that's just a sort of a cross wiring that's happening where people are just sort of thinking that like they have the pleasure of that saltiness, and so it almost tastes sweet, and so then their brain sort of says, well, I enjoy that the way I would enjoy something sweet, so it's the same thing. And so it's sort of a mismatched wiring, and bitterness, the same way, sort of a mismatched wire, like, ooh, that's too bitter, that's too salty, so it tastes bad to them. Yeah, there's a lot of individual differences in the way we perceive taste and how we value them.
So would umami be considered like the same thing as like savory?
Yeah. I'm gonna just say it. That's pretty much it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm afraid that's going to be about it as far as time. So thank you all for joining us today with Dr. Franssen. Dr. Franssen, thank you so much for coming and being with us today. It's always a pleasure to have you on Lunch Break Science. So please join us next week on November 11th at noon for Dr. Serena Kajani. She's a Ph.D. in pharmacology and translational medicine. She graduated from University College Dublin, and the title of her lecture is The Proof is in the Poo, Dietary Fiber, Gut Health, and the Obesity Epidemic. It's going to be everything you ever wanted to know about the microbiome that is inside your digestive system. If you don't know a lot about that, you will definitely want to tune in for Dr. Kajani's lecture. She's brilliant. She's hilarious. You're definitely going to like Dr. Kajani. So I do definitely encourage you to sign up for next week. You can register at smv.org. The talk is free to attend and is open to the first 300 registrants. Thank you all again for joining us today. Until next week, stay safe and stay curious.